You're killing your family, Steiner. Thomas Bradley's voice cut through the October wind like a blade. Jacob didn't stop working his weathered hands, pressing another bundle of prairie hay against the cabin's north wall. Bradley grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. I'm the builder in this county. I've put up 40 homes, and I'm telling you, you're wrapping your cabin in a funeral shroud. Jacob met his eyes without flinching. Then you've built 40 homes wrong. The crowd behind Bradley erupted. Someone laughed. Someone else called him insane. But Jacob turned back to his work, binding the hay tighter, because he'd already buried 2 children in the frozen ground of Nebraska, and he wasn't about to bury his wife. If you want to see how Jacob's crazy method saved lives when the worst blizzard in 50 years hit Nebraska, subscribe to this channel right now. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. The first bundle of hay hit the ground 3 weeks earlier on September 28, 1888. Jacob Steiner had been up since dawn cutting prairie grass in the low meadow near Dry Creek. His son Wilhelm, 16 and broad-shouldered, worked beside him with the scythe. Papa, the Johnsons are already stacking firewood, Wilhelm said, sweat running down his face despite the cool morning air. The Dresslers, too. Everyone's preparing the same way they always do. Jacob didn't look up from binding the grass with willow strips. Let them. But Papa... Wilhelm. Jacob's voice wasn't loud, but it stopped the boy cold. How many winters have I survived in this county? 17. And how many have the Johnsons survived? 5, maybe 6. Jacob pulled the willow binding tight. Then let them prepare their way. We'll prepare ours. By October 5th, Jacob had harvested 3 tons of prairie hay. He stacked it behind the cabin in compressed bundles, each one 3 feet long, 18 inches thick, bound so tight that water couldn't penetrate more than an inch. His neighbors walked past, shaking their heads. Some stopped to ask questions. "What's all that for Jacob?" Martin Dressler called out from his wagon. "You planning to feed 100 cattle?" "Insulation," Jacob said. Dressler laughed. "You're insulating with hay like a barn." "Exactly like a barn." The laughter followed Dressler down the road. By evening, half the county had heard. Jacob Steiner was insulating his cabin like livestock housing. Mary, Jacob's wife, came out with water as the sun dropped toward the horizon. She was 58, thin from years of prairie hardship, but her eyes were steady. She'd learned long ago not to question her husband's instincts. "They're talking," she said quietly. "Let them talk." Thomas Bradley stopped by the store today. He told everyone you're making a mistake that'll freeze us to death. Jacob took the water, drank half, and handed it back. Bradley builds cabins the way everyone builds cabins. Clay chinking, wood stoves, firewood stacks, and every winter people freeze. Not everyone. No, not everyone. He looked at her directly. But Anna and Friedrich did. Mary's face tightened. The names still cut after 8 years. Their daughter, 7 years old. Their son, 5. Both dead in 4 days during the January freeze of 1880, when the temperature dropped to 20 below and stayed there for a week straight. The cabin's heat couldn't fight the cold. The children's fevers couldn't break. And Jacob had watched them die in the same room where he'd built them cradles. "This isn't about pride," Jacob said softly. "This is about keeping you and Wilhelm alive." Mary touched his arm. "I know." By October 12th, Jacob began the actual work. He started on the north wall, the side that took the worst of the winter wind. He built a wooden frame 3 feet out from the existing sod wall, then filled the gap with compressed hay bundles, stacking them tight, no air gaps, using river mud mixed with grass as mortar between layers. Wilhelm helped, but he couldn't hide his doubt. "Papa, this looks like we're building a barn around our house." "That's because we are." "But won't people? People will talk no matter what we do. They talked when I married your mother. They talked when I bought this land. They talked when I planted wheat instead of corn. And we're still here." By October 18th, the north wall was complete. Jacob moved to the east wall. Word had spread through the county like wildfire. On October 20th, Thomas Bradley showed up with 4 other men. Bradley was 42, tall, barrel-chested, with a reputation for solid construction work. He'd built the church, the school, and most of the newer homes in Custer County. When he spoke, people listened. "Jacob," Bradley called out, dismounting from his horse. "We need to talk." Jacob kept working, pressing another hay bundle into place. Bradley walked closer. "Jacob, I'm here as a friend." "Then talk as a friend." "This method you're using, it's dangerous. Hay is flammable. One spark from your stove and your whole cabin goes up. You're not protecting your family. You're building a tinderbox." Jacob turned to face him. "Have you ever built with hay before?" "No, because it's insane." "Then how do you know it's dangerous?" Bradley's face flushed. "It's common sense." "Common sense or common practice?" "What's the difference?" Jacob pointed to the partially covered cabin. "Common practice is what everyone does because everyone does it. Common sense is what actually works. You've built 40 cabins, Bradley. How many families froze to death in those cabins?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it the Hendersons they froze in their cabin in '82? The Peterson boy lost 3 toes to frostbite in '85 in a cabin you built. The Swensons nearly died in '86. Those were extreme winters. Every winter here is extreme." Jacob's voice rose for the first time. "And every year people die because they think wood and clay are enough. I'm from Bavaria. My grandfather built homes in the highlands where temperatures dropped to 40 below. He taught me techniques that kept families alive for generations. Techniques that work." One of the men with Bradley, a younger farmer named Robert Quinn, spoke up. "But Jacob, nobody else is doing this. If it worked, wouldn't more people use it?" "More people used to use it, then they forgot, or they decided it wasn't modern enough, or they thought new ways were better." Jacob turned back to his work. "But old ways work when new ways fail." Bradley stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Jacob, I'm asking you as someone who cares about this community to stop. You're setting a bad example. Other families might try to copy you, and when their cabins burn down, it'll be your fault." Jacob didn't turn around. "If you're worried about bad examples, Bradley, maybe you should worry about the cabins that freeze families to death instead of the ones that might keep them warm." The men left. The mockery intensified. By October 25th, the entire cabin was enclosed in hay, north, south, east, and west walls all wrapped in 18 inches of compressed prairie grass, bound with willow and sealed with river mud. The roof already had sod, which Jacob left alone. But the walls looked absurd, bulging outward, making the small cabin look like a bizarre haystack with a door. Children threw rocks at it. Adults made jokes. Mary heard it all when she went to town for supplies. "They're calling it the hay house," she told Jacob that evening. "Good. Let them remember what it's called when winter hits." But Wilhelm was struggling. At 16, reputation mattered. His friends had stopped coming around. People whispered when he walked by. "Papa," he said on October 28th, "what if they're right? What if we're making a mistake?" Jacob was reinforcing the doorframe, adding extra hay around the gaps. He stopped, looked at his son directly. "Wilhelm, do you trust me?" "Yes, but no. Do you trust me?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "I buried your sister and brother. I held them while they died. I heard them cry from the cold. I couldn't save them because our cabin wasn't warm enough, and I didn't know then what I know now." Jacob's voice was steady, but his eyes were fierce. "I will not bury another child. I will not bury your mother, and I will not bury you. If that means being called a fool, then I'm a fool. But I'm a fool who will keep his family alive." Wilhelm never questioned him again. On November 2nd, Thomas Bradley brought the county surveyor, a man named George Hastings, to inspect the cabin. Hastings was in his 50s, methodical, respected for his engineering knowledge. "Jacob," Hastings said, walking around the hay-covered structure, "I've been asked to evaluate the safety of this building." Evaluate away. Hastings pulled out a notebook, making measurements, checking the compaction of the hay, examining the mud sealant. Bradley stood nearby, arms crossed, confident. After 30 minutes, Hastings put his notebook away. He looked at Bradley, then at Jacob. "Well?" Bradley demanded. "Tell him it's unsafe." Hastings cleared his throat. "I can't." "What?" "The compaction is excellent. The hay is dry and tightly bound. The mud sealant creates a moisture barrier. The frame is structurally sound." He looked at Jacob with something like respect. "This is actually well designed." Bradley's face went red. "But it's hay. Compressed hay is an excellent insulator, better than wood in many ways. If the stove is properly maintained and the chimney is clear, fire risk is minimal." Hastings nodded to Jacob. "I've seen worse construction from professional builders." He left. Bradley stayed behind, furious. "You humiliated me in front of Hastings." Jacob was mixing more mud sealant. "I didn't humiliate you. I built a cabin." "This isn't over, Steiner. When winter comes, when your family freezes, everyone will remember I tried to stop you. And when winter comes, when my family is warm, everyone will remember you tried to." Bradley rode off. Jacob went back to work. By November 10th, the first real cold snap hit. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees at night. Neighbors fired up their stoves, burned through firewood, struggled to keep warm. Inside Jacob's hay-covered cabin, the temperature stayed at 55 degrees without lighting the stove until evening. Mary felt the walls. They were warm to the touch. The compressed hay was already trapping heat from the day's sun, holding it through the night. "Jacob," she whispered, "it's working. It'll work better when real winter comes." November brought more cold. By November 18th, temperatures were consistently in the teens at night. Jacob's neighbors were burning twice as much wood as usual. Complaints spread through town. Firewood supplies were running low, earlier than expected. But Jacob barely used his stove. The hay walls held heat so effectively that one small fire in the evening kept the cabin comfortable through the night. Wilhelm noticed it first. Papa the Dresslers came by asking if we had extra firewood to sell. "What did you tell them?" "That we weren't selling." "Good." "But Papa, shouldn't we help them?" Jacob looked at his son carefully. "Wilhelm, winter hasn't truly started yet. This is nothing compared to what's coming. When the real cold hits, everyone will need their resources. We help ourselves first. Then, if we have extra, we help others. But we can't save anyone if we don't survive ourselves." It was a harsh lesson, but Wilhelm understood. By November 25th, the mockery had quieted. Not stopped, but quieted. People were noticing that the Steiner cabin wasn't belching smoke like everyone else's. They were noticing that Jacob wasn't chopping firewood every day. They were starting to wonder. Thomas Bradley wasn't wondering. He was seething. On November 28th, he confronted Jacob at the general store. "You're making me look like a fool." Bradley said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm making you look like nothing. You're doing that yourself. People are asking me why their cabins aren't as warm as yours. Then tell them the truth. You built what everyone builds, and I built what actually works." Bradley grabbed Jacob's coat. "I've lived here for 20 years. I'm respected. I'm trusted. And you're some German immigrant who thinks he knows better than everyone else." Jacob didn't pull away. He met Bradley's eyes with absolute calm. "I don't think I know better than everyone else. I know better than you." Bradley shoved him. Mary gasped. Wilhelm moved forward, but Jacob raised a hand, stopping him. "Bradley," Jacob said quietly, "winter is coming. A real winter. When it hits, you'll wish you built your cabin like mine. And when families start freezing, you'll remember this moment." He walked out. Bradley stood there shaking with rage, surrounded by witnesses who'd seen everything. By December 5th, the temperature dropped to 0. It was the coldest start to winter in 15 years. Panic rippled through the county. Families were already running low on firewood. Stores were selling out of supplies. Jacob's cabin stayed at 58 degrees with minimal heating. On December 8th, Mary answered a knock at the door. It was Sarah Quinn, Robert Quinn's wife, holding her baby. "Mary," Sarah said, shivering. "Can I come in?" "Just for a few minutes. Our cabin is so cold and the baby won't stop crying." Mary looked at Jacob. He nodded. Sarah came in and her face transformed as the warmth hit her. "Oh my God, it's actually warm in here." "Sit by the stove," Mary said. Sarah sat holding her baby close, tears running down her face. "We're burning everything we have. Robert is chopping fence posts. We're burning furniture. And it's still so cold." Jacob said nothing. Wilhelm looked uncomfortable. After 20 minutes, Sarah left, thanking them repeatedly. But the word spread the Steiner cabin was genuinely warm. By December 12th, more neighbors stopped by with excuses. Borrowing tools. Asking questions. Really, they just wanted to feel the warmth. And each time they saw the same thing, a cabin that stayed warm with almost no effort while their own homes were freezing death traps. The mockery died completely. On December 18th, Thomas Bradley's daughter Martha got sick. The cold had settled into her lungs. Bradley's wife Catherine was desperate. She came to Jacob's cabin alone without her husband. "Jacob," she said, her voice breaking. "Martha is sick. She's coughing blood. The cabin is so cold. I'm afraid." She couldn't finish. Mary looked at Jacob. He looked at Catherine, this proud woman brought low by desperation. "Bring her here," he said. "She can stay until she recovers." "Thomas won't. I don't care what Thomas will or won't do. Bring the girl." Catherine left in tears. An hour later, she returned with Martha wrapped in blankets, shivering violently. Thomas wasn't with them. They put Martha in Wilhelm's bed. Wilhelm slept on the floor without complaint. Mary made hot broth. Jacob added more wood to the stove, bringing the temperature up to 70 degrees. By morning, Martha's fever had broken. By evening, her breathing was easier. By the next day, she was sitting up eating solid food. Catherine watched in amazement. "She's healing. In one day, she's healing." "Warmth," Jacob said simply. "Warmth lets the body fight." On December 20th, Thomas Bradley came to pick up his daughter. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, unable to meet Jacob's eyes. "She's better," Catherine told him. "Jacob saved her." Bradley looked at Jacob. The words caught in his throat. "Take your daughter home," Jacob said, "and keep her warm." Bradley left without speaking, but as he walked away, Wilhelm saw something that shocked him. Thomas Bradley was crying. "Papa," Wilhelm said quietly. "I think he understands now." Jacob looked out at the December sky, at the clouds building in the northwest, heavy and dark and full of snow. "No," he said. "Not yet. But he will." Because Jacob Steiner had been watching the signs for weeks. The thickness of the ice on Dry Creek, the behavior of the animals, the color of the sunset, the feel of the wind, and every sign was screaming the same warning. The worst winter in 50 years was about to begin. The temperature dropped to 10 below on December 22nd. Jacob was outside checking the hay walls, pressing his hand against them, feeling for soft spots where moisture might have penetrated. Wilhelm worked beside him, learning. "Papa, the hay is still bone dry." Check again, every section. Water gets in through the smallest crack, and once it freezes, it ruins the insulation. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. Then Wilhelm stopped his hand on the south wall. "Papa, I found something." Jacob came over immediately. There was a small gap where two bundles met, barely visible, but enough for moisture to seep through. He pulled out his knife, cut away the damaged section, packed fresh hay into the gap, sealed it with mud. "Good eye," Jacob said. "That could have cost us heat when the real cold hits." "When do you think it'll come?" Jacob looked at the sky. The clouds were moving wrong, not west to east like normal, but swirling restless. "Soon. Maybe days." Wilhelm followed his gaze. How do you know? The animals know first. Watch the cattle. They're bunching together tighter than usual. The birds left 3 days early. Even the mice are deeper underground than normal. He touched the wall again. Nature doesn't lie. Only people do. That afternoon, Robert Quinn showed up. The man who'd questioned Jacob back in October now stood at his door, hat in his hands. Jacob, I need advice. Come in. Quinn stepped inside and his whole body relaxed as the warmth surrounded him. Jesus, it's like summer in here. What do you need, Robert? Our cabin is freezing. We're out of firewood by tomorrow. I've been burning everything, furniture, fence posts, even some of the floorboards. Sarah is terrified. The baby won't stop crying. He looked at Jacob desperately. What do I do? Jacob didn't answer immediately. He looked at this man who'd stood with Bradley, who'd called him crazy, who'd mocked him in front of the whole county. You need insulation, Jacob said finally. Wood heat alone won't save you in what's coming. What's coming? The worst storm in 50 years. Quinn's face went white. How do you know? I know. Jacob stood, walked to a supply corner, pulled out several compressed hay bundles. Take these. Pack them against your north and west walls. Those are where the wind hits hardest. Use mud or clay to seal the gaps. It won't be perfect, but it might keep your family alive. Quinn stared at the hay bundles. You're giving me these? After everything I said? You have a wife and a baby. I don't care what you said. Jacob pushed the bundles toward him. But you need to work fast. If I'm right, you have maybe 2 days. Quinn loaded the hay onto his wagon, his hands shaking. Before he left, he turned back. Jacob, I'm sorry, I was wrong about you. Save your family first, apologize later. Quinn left. Wilhelm watched from the window. Papa, we don't have much hay left. If you keep giving it away, we have enough for us. That's what matters. But Jacob's voice was tight. He'd calculated their reserves down to the pound. They could survive, but there was no margin for error. By December 24th, more families came. The Johnsons, the Swensons, the Hendersons. Each one desperate, each one admitting they'd been wrong. Jacob gave what he could spare, small bundles, advice techniques. Mary watched their supplies dwindle, her face growing more worried with each visitor. Jacob, we're running low. I know. What if the storm lasts longer than you think? Then we burn less. We wear more clothes. We sleep closer together. He took her hand. But we'll survive. That's what this was all for. Christmas morning came cold and clear, deceptively calm. Jacob didn't trust it. He was outside reinforcing the door seals when Thomas Bradley rode up. The builder dismounted slowly, like a man walking to his execution. Jacob! Bradley. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Bradley spoke, his voice rough. My daughter is alive because of you. Your daughter is alive because she got warm. That's all. No, that's not all. Bradley looked at the hay-covered cabin, and something broke in his face. I've been building cabins for 20 years. Good cabins, strong cabins, cabins that people trust. And every winter people suffer in them. People die in them. And I told myself it was just the weather, just bad luck. He met Jacob's eyes. But it's not bad luck. It's bad design. And I've been too proud to see it. Jacob waited. I was wrong, Bradley said. About everything. About you. About this. He gestured at the cabin. I tried to stop you because I was afraid you'd make me look like a fool. But I made myself a fool by fighting you. What do you want, Bradley? I want to learn. Before the storm hits, and I believe you. Now I believe it's coming. I want to learn how to protect my family. Jacob studied him carefully. This was the man who'd grabbed him in the store, who'd humiliated him in front of the county, who'd tried to turn everyone against him. But this was also a father who'd almost lost his daughter. A builder who'd finally admitted his buildings weren't good enough. "Come back tomorrow morning," Jacob said. "Bring your son. I'll teach you what I can." Bradley's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak, and rode away. Mary came out after he left. "You're helping him, after everything he did. He's a father trying to save his family, same as me." "But Jacob..." "Mary, when the storm comes, I don't want anyone to die because I was too proud to share what I know. Anna and Friedrich died because I didn't know enough then. I won't let other children die because I do know now." She kissed his cheek. "You're a better man than most." "No, I'm just a man who's buried children. That changes you." December 26th. Bradley came back with his son Michael, a boy of 19. They worked all day, Jacob teaching them compression techniques, insulation principles, moisture barriers. Bradley absorbed everything like a drowning man gulping air. "The key is no air gaps," Jacob explained, demonstrating with hay bundles. "Air gaps mean cold penetration. You want solid compression, tight packing." Michael was quick, his hands skilled. "Mr. Steiner, why didn't anyone teach us this before?" "Because everyone forgot. Or they thought modern methods were better, or they were too proud to admit the old ways worked." Bradley worked in silence, his face grim with concentration. At the end of the day, he stood back looking at what they'd accomplished. "It's not enough," he said. "I don't have enough materials. I don't have enough time." "Then focus on one room," Jacob told him. "Make one room as warm as possible. Move your whole family into that room when the storm hits. Survive first. Perfect things later." Bradley gripped his hand. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when your family is alive on the other side." That evening, the wind shifted. Jacob felt it immediately, a change in direction, a drop in temperature, something fundamentally wrong in the air. Wilhelm felt it too. "Papa, it's starting. Should we warn everyone?" Jacob looked toward town, toward the scattered farms, toward all the families who'd mocked him, ignored him, called him crazy. "Get on your horse," he said. "Ride to every farm within 5 miles. Tell them the storm is coming tomorrow. Tell them to seal their cabins, gather supplies, prepare for the worst. Tell them..." He stopped, emotion catching in his throat. "Tell them Jacob Steiner says they have one day to save their lives." Wilhelm mounted and rode hard. Mary watched him go, then turned to Jacob. "He might not make it back before the storm." "He'll make it. He's smart and he knows the land." But Jacob's hands were shaking as he said it. Wilhelm rode for 6 hours straight, stopping at every farm, every cabin, every homestead. Some people listened. Some laughed. Some slammed doors in his face. At the Dressler farm, Martin Dressler opened the door bottle in hand. "Your father is still preaching doom," Dressler slurred. "Sir, the storm is coming. Papa says tomorrow, maybe tonight. You need to prepare." "Your father is a fearmonger." "My father saved Martha Bradley's life, and he's trying to save yours." Dressler wavered, some part of him recognizing the truth. "What should I do?" "Seal your cabin. Every crack, every gap. Gather all your firewood into one place. Move your family into one room. Keep everyone together. That's it. That's all you can do now. Papa says it's too late for anything else." Dressler sobered slightly. "Tell your father. Tell him I'm sorry I laughed." Wilhelm rode on. At the Henderson farm, Elizabeth Henderson answered the door, 3 small children clinging to her skirts. "Wilhelm Steiner, what are you doing out in this cold?" "Mrs. Henderson, please listen. A storm is coming. The worst storm in 50 years. You need to prepare immediately." She looked at him skeptically, then at the clear sky. "It doesn't look like a storm." "That's what makes it dangerous. Please, Mrs. Henderson, for your children." Something in his voice convinced her. "What should I do?" He repeated his father's instructions. "Seal everything. Gather supplies. Stay together in one room." "Thank you, Wilhelm." Tell your father I'm grateful even if the storm doesn't come. It's coming, Wilhelm said. He's never been wrong about weather, not once. By the time Wilhelm made it home, it was past midnight. He was shaking from cold and exhaustion. Jacob had hot broth waiting. You warned them. Everyone I could reach. Some listened, some didn't. You did what you could. That's all anyone can do. They slept that night with the wind picking up outside an eerie howling that made the walls vibrate. Mary couldn't sleep. She kept checking the children's old beds, touching the places where Anna and Friedrich had died. Mary, Jacob whispered. Come here. She came to him, and he held her while the wind grew stronger. We're going to survive this, he said. All of us. How do you know? Because I built this cabin to survive the impossible, and because I refuse to lose anyone else I love. December 27th dawned gray and violent. The temperature had dropped to 20 below overnight. The wind was sustained at 40 miles per hour with gusts stronger. Snow hadn't started yet, but the sky was the color of iron. Jacob went outside to check the walls one final time. The wind nearly knocked him over. He pressed his hands against the hay, feeling it hold firm, feeling the compression resisting the wind's force. Wilhelm came out to help him. They had to shout to be heard over the wind. Papa, I'm scared. Good. Fear keeps you alert, but don't let it paralyze you. They finished the inspection. Everything was secure. Jacob looked toward town, toward the other farms, wondering who'd listened, who'd prepared, who was about to die, because they'd dismissed his warning. At 10 o'clock, Thomas Bradley arrived with his entire family, his wife, Catherine Martha, and Michael. They were pulling a wagon loaded with supplies. Jacob, Bradley shouted over the wind. My cabin isn't ready. It won't hold. Jacob looked at Mary. She nodded without hesitation. Bring your family inside. Quickly. They rushed everyone in 7 people now in the small cabin. It felt cramped immediately, but the warmth was undeniable. Catherine Bradley collapsed into a chair, holding Martha close. Thank God. Thank God. An hour later, another knock. The Quinns, Robert, Sarah, and their baby. They looked half frozen. Jacob, our cabin is falling apart in the wind. Please. 9 people now. The cabin was crowded but still warm. At noon, the Hendersons arrived, Elizabeth and her 3 children. 12 people total. Mary pulled Jacob aside. We don't have enough food for this many. We'll ration. We'll share. We'll survive. At 1 o'clock, the snow started. It didn't fall gently. It exploded horizontally, driven by 70-mile-per-hour winds hitting the cabin like shotgun pellets. The sound was deafening, a roar that made conversation nearly impossible. The temperature outside plunged to 30 below, then 35, then 40. Inside the cabin, despite 12 people, despite the overcrowding, despite the terror, the temperature held at 55 degrees. Jacob watched the faces around him. Terror, awe, disbelief. They couldn't understand how this was possible. Thomas Bradley stared at the walls, at the compressed hay that was keeping them alive. How is this working? He shouted over the storm. Physics, Jacob shouted back. Insulation, thermal mass compression. I build houses for a living and I don't understand how this is working. Then learn. The storm raged on. Hours passed. The children huddled together, frightened by the noise. The adults tried to stay calm, but panic was creeping in. At 4 o'clock, another knock. Everyone froze. Who would be out in this storm? Jacob opened the door, and Martin Dressler fell through half dead from cold ice coating his beard. My cabin collapsed, he gasped. The roof caved in. My wife and children. He couldn't finish. Where are they? Jacob demanded. Still there. Under debris. I tried to dig them out, but I couldn't. Wilhelm was already grabbing his coat. No! Mary screamed. Jacob looked at his son, then at Dressler, then at the storm that was howling like something alive and hungry. We have to go, Wilhelm said quietly. They'll die. Jacob knew he was right. He also knew they might die trying to save them. Thomas, Jacob said, you're in charge here. Keep everyone calm. Keep everyone warm. If we don't come back, you'll come back, Bradley said firmly. You didn't survive this long to die in a rescue. Jacob grabbed rope tools, extra clothes. Wilhelm did the same. Mary grabbed Jacob's face. Come back to me. Always. They stepped out into hell. The wind hit like a physical blow, knocking Wilhelm to his knees. Jacob pulled him up, tied the rope between them, and they pushed forward into the storm. Visibility was zero. The cold was instant and total, seeping through clothes, burning exposed skin. They could barely see their own hands. Follow Dressler, Jacob shouted. He knows the way. They stumbled through the blizzard, tied together, following a man who was half frozen and barely conscious. The Dressler farm was only a quarter-mile away, but it felt like miles. 20 minutes later they found it, or what was left of it. The cabin roof had collapsed under snow and wind, the walls had buckled, debris everywhere. Where? Jacob shouted. Dressler pointed to the wreckage, unable to speak. Jacob and Wilhelm started digging, throwing aside boards, snow hay, anything in the way. Their hands were numb. Their faces were frozen, but they kept digging. Wilhelm's hand hit something soft. Papa! They pulled away more debris. Mrs. Dressler was there, unconscious, her 3 children pressed against her, all of them barely breathing. Get them up! Jacob screamed. We have to move now. They pulled the family out one by one, Wilhelm carrying the smallest child, Jacob carrying Mrs. Dressler over his shoulder. Dressler himself carrying his 2 older children despite being half dead. The trip back was worse. The wind had increased. The cold was murderous. Wilhelm fell twice. Jacob fell once, nearly losing his grip on Mrs. Dressler. But they pushed forward, fighting for every step, the rope between them, the only thing keeping them together. When they finally saw the faint outline of Jacob's cabin through the snow, Wilhelm nearly wept with relief. They crashed through the door, 5 more people, all of them on the verge of death from exposure. Mary and Catherine Bradley immediately went to work, stripping wet clothes, wrapping everyone in blankets, forcing hot broth into mouths. 17 people now in a cabin built for 4. Jacob collapsed against the wall, his entire body shaking from exhaustion and cold. Wilhelm fell beside him, equally spent. That was insane, Wilhelm gasped. That was necessary. Papa, we almost died. But we didn't, and neither did they. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, 17 souls huddled together in the warmth of compressed hay, and one man's stubborn refusal to let anyone else die. Thomas Bradley looked at Jacob, this man, he'd mocked this man, he'd fought this man, who'd just saved 5 lives in a storm that would have killed them all. You're not crazy, Bradley said quietly. You're the sanest man I've ever met. Jacob didn't respond. He was watching the walls, listening to the wind, calculating how long the storm would last, how long their supplies would hold, how many more people might need saving before this nightmare ended. Because the storm had only just begun, and the worst was still coming. By 6 o'clock, the temperature inside the cabin had dropped to 48 degrees. 17 people created body heat, but they also consumed oxygen. Opened the door, brought in cold and snow. Jacob was burning through firewood faster than planned. Mrs. Dressler was conscious now, holding her children close, all of them wrapped in blankets by the stove. She looked at Jacob with eyes full of something between gratitude and shame. You saved us, she whispered. After my husband laughed at you. Your husband is learning, that's enough. Martin Dressler sat in the corner staring at his hands. He hadn't spoken since they'd arrived. The reality of what had almost happened, his entire family buried under his collapsed cabin, had broken something in him. Wilhelm sat beside him. Mr. Dressler, it's not your fault. I didn't listen. Dressler's voice was hollow. Your father warned me. You warned me. And I laughed. I drank instead of preparing. And my family nearly died because of my pride. But they didn't die. You brought them here. Only after my cabin collapsed. Only after I'd failed them completely. Jacob overheard this, but said nothing. Some lessons could only be learned through shame. By 7 o'clock, the children were hungry. Mary and Catherine Bradley were rationing the food they had: bread, dried meat, some potatoes. It wasn't enough for 17 people for more than a few days. We need to stretch everything, Mary said quietly to Jacob. Make every meal smaller, every portion count. How long can we last? 4 days, maybe 5, if the storm breaks by then. And if it doesn't? Mary didn't answer. They both knew. At 8 o'clock, the wind hit a new level. The entire cabin shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The children screamed. The adults tried to look calm, but terror was spreading. Is the cabin going to collapse? Robert Quinn asked, his voice cracking. No, Jacob said firmly. The frame is solid. The foundation is deep. The hay absorbs the wind force instead of fighting it. We're safe. How can you be sure? Because I built this cabin to survive the impossible, and I don't fail when lives depend on me. It was the most arrogant thing Jacob had ever said, but it was what everyone needed to hear. The panic settled slightly. At 9 o'clock, another knock. Everyone froze. The storm was worse now. Who could possibly be out there? Jacob opened the door. A man fell through, covered in ice and snow, barely recognizable. It took a moment before Jacob realized who it was. George Hastings, the county surveyor who'd defended Jacob's cabin design. Help me, Hastings gasped. My family's still at our cabin, can't make it too far. How far? Jacob demanded. 2 miles, maybe 3. Wilhelm stood immediately. We have to go get them. No, Thomas Bradley said sharply. You barely made it back from the Dresslers, and that was only a quarter mile. 3 miles in this storm is suicide. Then they'll die, Wilhelm shouted. And you'll die trying to save them. The cabin erupted. Some people agreed with Bradley it was too dangerous. Others sided with Wilhelm. They couldn't let a family die. Jacob stood in the center, listening to everyone argue, his mind racing through calculations. Distance, temperature, wind speed, visibility. The odds of making it there and back. The odds were terrible. We're not going, Jacob said finally. Wilhelm stared at him in disbelief. Papa, you can't be serious. 3 miles in this storm means death. I won't sacrifice you for a rescue that can't succeed. But you went for the Dresslers. That was different. A quarter mile, visible landmarks. This is 3 miles of nothing but wind and snow. We wouldn't even find their cabin, much less make it back. Hastings grabbed Jacob's coat, desperate. Please, my wife, my 2 boys, they're alone. Jacob pulled away, his face hard. Then you shouldn't have left them. The words hit like a slap. Hastings recoiled, then collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Wilhelm looked at his father like he was seeing a stranger. You're going to let them die. I'm going to keep the people in this cabin alive. That's my responsibility. What happened to, I won't let other children die? What happened to that? Jacob's jaw tightened. That was when I could actually save them. Now I can't. And I won't let you die trying. Wilhelm turned away, disgusted. The cabin fell into uncomfortable silence. Everyone avoided looking at Hastings, who sat against the wall, broken. Mary pulled Jacob aside. That was cruel. That was necessary. If I let Wilhelm go out there, he dies. If I go myself, I die. And then, what happens to you, to everyone here? You're right. But that doesn't make it easier. Being right never does. At 10 o'clock, the wind reached 80 miles per hour. The cabin wasn't just shaking anymore. It was groaning. The roof beams were flexing. The walls were holding, but the stress was visible. Jacob, Bradley said nervously, are you sure this structure can handle this? It has to, because we have no other choice. Not exactly reassuring. At 11 o'clock, Hastings stood up suddenly. His eyes had gone cold and hard. "I'm leaving," he said. "Hastings, don't be stupid," Bradley said. "My family is out there. I'm not abandoning them." Jacob stepped in front of the door. "You leave now, you're dead in 20 minutes. Then I'm dead, but I'll die trying to save them instead of warm and safe while they freeze. You'll die accomplishing nothing. Your death won't save them. It'll just add another body to the count." Hastings shoved him. "Get out of my way." Jacob didn't move. "You want to die, fine, but you're not opening that door and letting cold air kill everyone else in here." "I don't care about everyone else." "That's your problem. You only care when it's convenient, when it's easy, when you don't have to sacrifice anything." Jacob's voice was cold. "Your family is dying because you left them. That's on you. Don't make it worse by dying stupidly." Hastings punched him. Jacob's head snapped back. Blood ran from his nose. Wilhelm moved forward, but Jacob raised a hand, stopping him. "Feel better?" Jacob asked calmly. "No." "Good. Because nothing will make you feel better except accepting reality. Your family is probably already dead. Going out there won't change that. It'll just kill you too." Hastings collapsed again, the fight gone out of him. He curled into a ball and stopped speaking entirely. Wilhelm looked at his father with something between respect and horror. "Papa, that was brutal." It was truth. Sometimes truth is brutal. At midnight, one of the Henderson children, a boy named Peter, started coughing. Not a small cough, a deep, rattling cough that shook his whole body. Elizabeth Henderson held him close. "It's just the cold air. He'll be fine." But Mary knew better. She'd heard that cough before. In Anna. In Friedrich. "Elizabeth," Mary said gently, "bring him closer to the stove. Keep him warm. Give him hot water with honey if you have any." "I don't have honey." "Then just hot water. As hot as he can drink." By 1 in the morning, Peter was burning with fever. His cough was worse. He was struggling to breathe. Elizabeth was panicking. "He needs a doctor. Where's the nearest doctor?" 4 miles away, Jacob said. "And he's not coming in this storm." "Then what do I do?" Mary took charge. She stripped Peter's sweat-soaked clothes, wrapped him in dry blankets, positioned him where the stove heat hit him directly. She made him drink water constantly, even when he didn't want to. "His body needs to fight this," Mary explained. "Warmth and water give him the best chance." "Will he live?" Elizabeth whispered. Mary thought of her own children, of the nights she'd held them praying, watching them die despite everything she did. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But we'll do everything possible." At 2 in the morning, Martha Bradley started coughing too. Then one of the Dressler children. Then Sarah Quinn's baby. "It's spreading," Catherine Bradley said, fear in her voice. "We're all going to get sick." "It's not contagious," Mary said. "It's the cold, the stress, the shock of going from freezing to warm too quickly. Their bodies can't handle it." "So what do we do?" "Keep them warm, keep them hydrated, keep them alive long enough for their bodies to adjust." But they were running out of clean water. The snow they melted for drinking was taking firewood to heat. They were burning through resources at an unsustainable rate. Jacob did the math. 2 days of firewood left maybe less, 3 days of food, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. At 3 in the morning, Thomas Bradley pulled Jacob aside. "We need to talk, privately." They moved to the corner, speaking in low voices. "Jacob, we're going to run out of supplies before this storm ends." "I know." "So what's the plan?" "We ration harder. We burn less. We make what we have last. And when it runs out completely—" Jacob was silent. "Jacob," Bradley pressed, "when the food is gone, what happens? Do we draw lots? Do the strongest survive? Do we—" He couldn't finish the thought. "It won't come to that." "How do you know?" Because I won't let it. Bradley studied him carefully. You're planning something. I'm always planning something. Tell me. Jacob looked around the cabin at the 17 people depending on him, at his son, who was disappointed in him, at his wife, who was exhausted from caring for sick children, at the man who'd punched him and now sat catatonic in the corner. If the supplies run out, Jacob said quietly, I go outside. You'll die. Maybe. Or maybe I make it to one of the abandoned cabins, find food stores, bring them back. In this storm, that's suicide. It's survival. Mine doesn't matter if everyone else dies. Bradley gripped his shoulder. Don't do anything stupid, Jacob. We need you alive. Then pray the storm breaks soon. At 4 a.m, little Peter Henderson's fever broke. He opened his eyes, weak but conscious, and asked for water. Elizabeth Henderson sobbed with relief. Mary smiled, the first real smile in hours. He's going to be okay, Mary said. But Martha Bradley was getting worse. The baby was worse. The Dressler child was worse. Wilhelm watched his mother work, moving from child to child, doing everything possible with almost nothing to work with. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the desperate determination. He saw his father in the corner, calculating, planning, willing to die, if necessary, to keep everyone else alive. And he understood suddenly why his father had refused to go after Hastings' family. Not because he didn't care, but because losing Jacob meant losing everyone. Wilhelm went to his father. Papa, I'm sorry, I was wrong. About what? About the Hastings family. You were right. Going after them would have killed us and saved no one. I know I was right, but that doesn't make it feel any better. Does anything ever feel better when you have to choose who lives and who dies? Jacob looked at his son, this boy who was becoming a man in the worst possible way. No, Jacob said. It never does. You just learn to live with it. At 5 a.m, the cabin door rattled. Not from wind, from knocking. Everyone tensed. Another survivor, another family needing rescue. Jacob opened the door. A woman fell through, barely alive, her face blackened with frostbite, her hands frozen solid. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even move. Mary rushed over. Get her by the stove. Carefully, don't rub the frostbite, you'll damage the tissue. They brought her close to the heat. Slowly, carefully, they warmed her extremities. After 10 minutes, she could speak, though her voice was broken. My name is Sarah Mitchell. My husband is dead. Froze to death 3 hours ago. I left him. I left his body, and I walked. I walked until I saw your light. You walked in this storm? Wilhelm asked, amazed. I walked because staying meant dying. My cabin had no insulation, no food, no firewood. My husband gave me his coat before he died, told me to run, told me to find help. She started crying. I left him there. I left my husband's body in the snow, and I ran. You survived, Jacob said. That's what he wanted. I should have died with him. No, you should live because he died giving you that chance. Don't waste it. Sarah Mitchell looked at this man who'd built a cabin that glowed like a beacon in the storm, who'd taken in 17 people, who was barely holding everything together. Are we going to survive this? She whispered. Jacob looked around the cabin. 18 people now. Sick children. Dwindling supplies. A storm that wouldn't end. Yes, he said firmly. Because I built this cabin to survive anything. And I don't break my promises. But as he said it, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A cracking sound. Coming from the roof. Everyone heard it. Everyone looked up. Papa, Wilhelm said nervously. The cabin had survived 24 hours of 80-mile-per-hour winds. It had protected 18 people. It had done everything Jacob designed it to do. But now, after hours of relentless punishment, after the weight of snow and ice, after the structural stress of wind that wouldn't stop, something was starting to fail. Another crack. Louder this time. Everyone moved to the south wall. Jacob ordered. Now! They scrambled, pressing against the far wall, away from where the sound was coming from. Jacob stared at the roof beams, watching for signs of collapse, calculating how much time they had, whether the structure could hold, whether everything he'd built was about to come crashing down. Thomas Bradley stood beside him. Jacob, if the roof fails, it won't fail. But if it does, it won't. Because I built it right. Because I used techniques that have worked for centuries. Because I refuse to let this storm win. Another crack. The loudest yet. One of the children screamed. And Jacob Steiner, the man who'd planned for everything, who'd prepared for the impossible, who'd saved 18 lives, realized he might have finally met something he couldn't control. The storm had found the cabin's weakness, and it was going in for the kill. Jacob grabbed Wilhelm's arm. Get the support beams from the storage corner, the ones I kept for emergencies. Papa, those are for now. Wilhelm ran. Jacob turned to Bradley. I need every strong man helping me. We're reinforcing that roof before it comes down. Bradley shouted orders. Michael Bradley, Robert Quinn Martin Dressler, all the able-bodied men moved immediately. They positioned themselves under the cracking beam, hands raised, taking the weight. The women pulled the children further back, pressing them against the south wall. Mary held Peter Henderson close, whispering prayers she hadn't said since burying her own children. Wilhelm returned with 3 support beams, thick posts Jacob had carved from oak, preparing for exactly this scenario. They positioned the first one directly under the crack. On 3, Jacob commanded. We push this into place and it takes the load. 1, 2. The crack widened. Snow started filtering through the gap. 3. They shoved the beam upward. It caught, grinding against the roof timber, taking some of the weight. The cracking sound stopped. Everyone held their breath. Second beam, Jacob said. Faster this time. They positioned it at an angle, creating a triangular support structure. Another push, another grind of wood against wood, and the second beam locked into place. The roof held. Jacob exhaled slowly. Third beam as backup. Then we're secure. They worked for another 10 minutes, sweat pouring despite the cold muscles screaming. When the third beam was in place, Jacob stepped back, studying their work. That'll hold, he said finally. The storm can rage all at once now. We're not collapsing. Thomas Bradley leaned against the wall, breathing hard. You had spare beams ready. You planned for the roof failing. I planned for everything failing. That's why nothing will. But as Jacob said it, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The firewood pile. It had shrunk dramatically. They'd been burning it faster during the crisis, keeping the stove hot, while everyone panicked, forgetting to conserve. He did quick calculations. 18 people. Current temperature. Current burn rate. They had 12 hours of firewood left, maybe less. Wilhelm saw his expression. Papa, we need to talk. Outside the hearing of the others. They moved to the far corner. Jacob spoke quietly, his voice controlled but urgent. We're out of firewood by tomorrow morning. The food will last maybe 2 more days if we keep rationing, and the storm isn't breaking. What do? We make a choice. Either we burn furniture and start cannibalizing the cabin for fuel, which weakens our shelter, or someone goes outside to scavenge from the collapsed cabins nearby. I'll go, Wilhelm said immediately. No. Papa, you're the only one who knows how to keep everyone alive in here. If you go out there and die, we all die. But if I go and die, you can still save everyone else. Jacob stared at his son, seeing the man he'd become over these 3 days. Not reckless, not heroic, just practical and brave enough to do what needed doing. No, Jacob said again, but his voice was softer. I won't risk you. Then we all freeze together. Is that better? Before Jacob could answer, George Hastings stood up from his corner. He'd been silent for hours, catatonic with grief. Now his eyes were clear and hard. I'll go, Hastings said. Everyone turned to look at him. My family is dead. I know it. I feel it. His voice was empty. So, I have nothing to lose. Tell me where the nearest collapsed cabin is. Tell me what to look for. I'll bring back whatever I can find. Hastings, Jacob said carefully. You'll likely die out there. Good. I want to die. But I might as well die doing something useful. The cabin fell silent. The storm howled outside. The children watched with frightened eyes. There's a cabin 200 yards northwest, Jacob said finally. The Johnsons. It should have firewood stores in the back shed. Maybe some food. How will I find it in zero visibility? Jacob pulled out rope. Tie this to your waist. We anchor the other end here. You follow the rope out, you follow it back. If you get lost, you tug 3 times and we pull you in. And if I can't find the cabin, then you come back empty-handed. Better than dead. Hastings took the rope. If I don't come back, tell my wife I tried. Tell my boys their father loved them. They're not dead yet, Mary said suddenly. Don't give up on them. Mrs. Steiner, they've been alone in an uninsulated cabin for 30 hours in 40 below temperatures. They're dead. I'm just too much of a coward to admit it. He tied the rope around his waist before anyone could stop him. Jacob secured the other end to the main support post. Wilhelm handed Hastings extra clothes, a scarf, gloves. Keep your face covered, Wilhelm said. Breathe through the scarf. Don't remove your gloves no matter how numb your hands get. Hastings nodded. He looked at Jacob one last time. You were right to refuse. I was stupid to leave them. And I'm more stupid for going back. You're not going back. You're going forward. There's a difference. Hastings opened the door. The storm sucked him out like a vacuum. Wilhelm slammed it shut behind him. They waited. 5 minutes passed. The rope stayed taut, moving slowly as Hastings pushed through the storm. 10 minutes. The rope jerked suddenly 3 times. He's in trouble. Wilhelm grabbed the rope. We have to pull him back. They pulled. The rope was heavy, dragging something. They hauled it hand over hand, Jacob and Wilhelm and Bradley all pulling together. 20 feet of rope. 30, 40. Hastings came through the door, dragging a bundle of firewood. His face was black with frostbite. His hands were frozen solid, but he'd made it. And he'd brought fuel. They pulled him inside, slammed the door shut. Mary and Catherine immediately went to work on his frostbite, warming him carefully, not too fast, knowing that rapid warming could do more damage. Wilhelm counted the wood. 20 pieces. That's 6 hours of heat, maybe 8 if we're careful. Not enough, Jacob said. But it's something. Hastings couldn't speak. His jaw was locked from cold, but his eyes were alive again. He'd accomplished something, done, something useful, given himself a reason to survive. Rest, Jacob told him. When you can feel your fingers again, we'll talk about another trip. But even as he said it, Jacob knew the truth. They'd gotten lucky once. Pushing luck twice was suicide. By 4 in the morning, Martha Bradley's condition had worsened. Her fever was spiking. Her breathing was labored. Catherine held her daughter, rocking her, singing softly, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. She's dying, Catherine whispered to Mary. I can feel it. She's dying just like before. She's not dying. She's fighting. But what if fighting isn't enough? Mary thought of Anna, of Friedrich, of the nights she'd told herself they were fighting only to watch them slip away. Then we fight harder, Mary said firmly. We don't give up while there's still breath. But Martha wasn't the only one deteriorating. Sarah Quinn's baby had stopped crying, not because he was better, but because he didn't have the strength. Sarah held him close, humming desperately, trying to keep him warm, keep him alive. He's not moving, Sarah gasped. He's not moving enough. Mary checked the baby. Weak pulse, shallow breathing, skin color wrong. Put him against your skin, Mary ordered. Direct body heat. Keep him warm with your own warmth. Sarah stripped off layers, held her baby against her bare chest, wrapped them both in blankets. The baby stirred slightly, a good sign. Talk to him, Mary said. Keep talking. Let him hear your voice. Give him something to hold on to. Sarah talked. Nonsense mostly. stories about his father, promises about the future, prayers she didn't really believe in anymore. And slowly, gradually, the baby's breathing strengthened. By 5 in the morning, Thomas Bradley pulled Jacob aside again. His face was grim. "Jacob, we need to discuss something nobody wants to discuss." "Say it." "If we run out of food completely, if we're starving, what do we do?" "We don't starve. The storm will break before then." "But if it doesn't?" Jacob looked at him directly. "Are you asking me if we should eat the dead?" Bradley flinched. "I'm asking what the plan is if things get truly desperate. The plan is to survive without becoming monsters. We're not animals, Bradley. We're people. And people don't cross certain lines no matter how hungry they get. Even if it means dying. Especially if it means dying." Bradley studied him carefully. "You've thought about this before." "I've thought about everything. That's my curse." "And your answer is, we'd rather die than compromise our humanity." "My answer is, we won't have to choose because the storm will break, and we'll survive, and we'll remember that we stayed human when everything else fell apart." Bradley nodded slowly. "I hope you're right." "So do I." At 6 in the morning, one of the Dressler children, a girl named Emma, maybe 7 years old, started crying. Not sick crying, hungry crying. "Mama, I'm so hungry. My stomach hurts." Mrs. Dressler had nothing to give her. They'd already eaten their rations for the day. There was no more until tomorrow. "I know, sweetheart, I know. Just try to sleep." "I can't sleep when I'm hungry." Other children heard this. They started crying too. Hunger was spreading like the sickness, making everyone miserable, making the cabin feel smaller, making hope harder to find. Mary looked at Jacob. He shook his head. No more food until the scheduled mealtime. They had to ration strictly, or they'd run out completely. But Mary couldn't watch children cry. She went to their food stores, pulled out a small piece of dried meat, cut it into tiny portions, gave one to each child. "This is special," she told them. "Just a little treat to help you sleep." They devoured the pieces gratefully. Their crying stopped. But Jacob saw what she'd done. He pulled her aside. "Mary, we can't do that. We need every ounce of food to last. They're children. They're suffering. We're all suffering. If you give in now, we run out faster. And then everyone dies, including those children. So we let them cry." "Yes, we let them cry, because crying means they're alive." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "I hate this. I hate every moment of this." "I know. So do I. But hating it doesn't change what we have to do." By 7 in the morning, the storm's intensity had somehow increased. The wind was hitting 90 miles per hour. The cabin was shaking so violently that items were falling from shelves. The support beams they'd installed were groaning. "This is impossible," Michael Bradley said. "Storms don't last this long. They don't hit this hard." "This one does," Jacob said. "Because we're not dealing with a normal storm. We're dealing with the worst winter in 50 years, and the worst doesn't follow normal rules." At 8 in the morning, Wilhelm noticed something that made him go cold. "Papa, there's ice forming on the inside of the walls." Jacob checked immediately. His son was right. Despite the hay insulation, despite the stove, the extreme cold outside was starting to penetrate. Ice crystals were forming on the inner wall surfaces. "What does this mean?" Bradley asked. "It means we're losing the thermal battle. The storm is so cold for so long that our insulation is reaching its limits. So we're going to freeze." "Not yet. But if the storm doesn't break soon, yes. Eventually, even this cabin won't be enough." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. At 9 in the morning, George Hastings, who'd thought enough to speak again, made an announcement. "I'm going back out. One more time. There's another cabin 400 yards east. The Petersons. They had a large food cellar." "You'll die," Jacob said bluntly. "Probably. But I'm already dead inside. My family is gone. I have nothing. At least this way my death means something. Hastings, this isn't about redemption. This is about survival. Then let me help us survive. They argued for 20 minutes, but Hastings was determined. Finally, Jacob gave in. Fine, but you take Wilhelm with you. 2 sets of eyes, 2 sets of hands. Better odds. Papa, no, Mary started. It's the only way, Jacob said firmly. Hastings can't do it alone, and Wilhelm is strong enough to help if things go wrong. Wilhelm grabbed his coat immediately. I'm ready. Mary gripped Jacob's arm. You're sending our son to die. I'm sending our son to save 18 lives, including ours. They prepared carefully. Double ropes, extra clothes, a plan for signaling, a time limit if they weren't back in 2 hours, assume they were dead. Wilhelm hugged his mother. She held him so tight he could barely breathe. Come back to me, she whispered. Always. They opened the door. Wilhelm and Hastings stepped into the storm together, tied to each other, and to the cabin by 200 feet of rope. The door slammed shut. Jacob stood by the rope holding it, feeling every tug, every movement, tracking their progress through the storm. Mary stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, both of them silent, praying to gods they weren't sure existed anymore. 10 minutes passed. The rope moved steadily eastward. 20 minutes. The rope stopped moving, then tugged sharply, the signal for found the cabin. 30 minutes. The rope jerked erratically. Something was wrong. They're in trouble, Jacob said. He started to pull, but the rope went slack suddenly. No, Mary breathed. No, no, no. Jacob pulled faster. The rope came back empty. They'd cut themselves free. Either they were dead or they'd found shelter and were waiting out the storm in the Peterson cabin. Either way, Jacob and Mary had just lost their son. Mary collapsed. Jacob caught her, held her, both of them staring at the rope that was supposed to bring Wilhelm home. The cabin fell silent. Even the children stopped crying. Everyone understood what had just happened. Thomas Bradley put his hand on Jacob's shoulder. He's not dead. He's smart. He's strong. He's with Hastings. They're sheltering somewhere safe. Jacob didn't respond. He just held his wife and stared at the storm that had taken his son. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Jacob Steiner, the man who'd planned for everything, who'd saved 18 lives, who'd built the cabin that everyone said was crazy, started to break. 2 hours passed. The rope lay coiled on the floor like a dead snake. Jacob sat beside it, his face empty. Mary had stopped crying. There were no tears left. Thomas Bradley watched them both, watched a man who'd been unbreakable finally shatter, and he understood something profound. The strongest people break the hardest when they finally do. Jacob, Bradley said quietly, talk to me. What's there to say? My son is gone. You don't know that. The rope is cut. He's either dead or trapped. Either way, I sent him out there. I killed him. You gave him a choice. He made it. He's 16. 16-year-olds don't make choices, they make mistakes. And I let him make this one because I was too afraid to go myself. Mary lifted her head. Don't you dare. Don't you dare blame yourself for his courage. His courage got him killed. His courage might have saved us all. She stood shaking, but her voice was steel. Wilhelm is your son. He has your stubbornness, your intelligence, your refusal to give up. If anyone can survive out there, it's him. You don't believe that. I believe it because I have to, because the alternative destroys me. So I choose to believe our son is alive, and he's fighting, and he's coming home. Jacob looked at her, this woman who'd buried 2 children and might bury a third, and saw strength he didn't have anymore. I don't know how to believe that, he whispered. Then I'll believe for both of us. At noon, Martha Bradley's fever broke. She opened her eyes, weak but conscious, and asked for water. Catherine Bradley sobbed with relief, holding her daughter close. You're back. "Oh God, you're back." "Mama, I'm cold." "I know, baby, but you're alive. That's all that matters." Mary checked the other sick children. Peter Henderson was sitting up eating small pieces of bread. The Dressler child was breathing easier. Sarah Quinn's baby was crying, actually crying with strength and volume. "They're recovering," Mary said to Jacob. "All of them. The warmth is working. They're going to survive." Jacob barely acknowledged her. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, waiting for his son to walk through it. At 1 o'clock, the firewood ran out. They'd burned the last piece an hour earlier, rationing it carefully, making it stretch. Now the stove was cold. The temperature inside the cabin immediately started dropping. 48 degrees. 45. 42. "We need to burn furniture," Bradley said. "The chairs, the table, anything wooden." "No," Jacob said flatly. "We're not destroying the cabin's structure. Jacob, we'll freeze. We'll survive. 18 people generate body heat. We huddle together. We share warmth. We make it through." They pressed together, all 18 of them, forming a mass of humanity in the center of the cabin. The children in the middle, the adults surrounding them, creating a barrier of flesh and breath against the cold. The temperature kept dropping. 38 degrees. 35. 32. They were literally freezing inside the cabin now, despite everything Jacob had built, despite all his planning. The storm had finally outlasted them. "This is it," someone whispered. "This is how we die." "No," Mary said firmly. "This is how we survive, together, holding each other, refusing to let go." At 2 o'clock, there was a pounding on the door. Everyone froze. Who could possibly be out there? Jacob stood slowly, his body stiff from cold. He walked to the door, hand on the handle, afraid of what he'd find. He opened it. Wilhelm fell through, dragging George Hastings behind him. Both were more ice than human, barely conscious but alive. And they were pulling a sled, loaded with firewood, food, blankets, supplies. "The Peterson cabin," Wilhelm gasped through frozen lips. "Fully stocked. We couldn't carry it all. Had to make a sled. Took hours." Mary screamed not from fear, but from joy, and threw herself at her son. Jacob grabbed them both, all three of them collapsing in a heap, crying, laughing alive. The others swarmed the sled, unloading supplies. Firewood went straight to the stove. Within minutes, flames were roaring again. Within an hour, the temperature was climbing back toward 50 degrees. Wilhelm and Hastings thawed slowly, painfully. Frostbite had taken its toll. Wilhelm would lose 2 toes, Hastings 3 fingers, but they were alive. "We cut the rope," Wilhelm explained, his voice hoarse. "Because we found the cellar entrance. It was buried under snow. If we'd tried to navigate back tied to the rope, we would have missed it. We had to cut free to dig down, get inside, see what was there." "And then?" Jacob asked. "We found everything. Food for months, firewood stacked floor to ceiling. The Petersons must have been preparing for a long winter." Wilhelm's face darkened. "We found them too, in the cellar. All 3 of them, frozen to death." "They had supplies but froze anyway?" Bradley asked, confused. "Their cabin had collapsed. The cellar entrance was blocked. They couldn't get out. They had food and fuel but no way to use it. They starved and froze 20 feet from salvation." The cabin fell silent. Everyone understanding the terrible irony. Preparation without accessibility was worthless. "We buried them as best we could," Hastings said quietly. "Then we loaded what we could carry and came back. Took us 4 hours to find this cabin again. Nearly died 3 times. But Wilhelm wouldn't quit. He just kept pushing forward." Jacob looked at his son with something beyond pride. "You saved us." "No, Papa. You saved us. You built the cabin. You gathered everyone. You taught me everything I needed to know to survive out there. I just followed your example." At 4 o'clock, with everyone fed and warming, with children laughing for the first time in days, Jacob noticed something that made him stand abruptly. The wind. Everyone stopped, listened. The roar had diminished. Not gone, but quieter. Definitely quieter. "Is it ending?" someone asked. Jacob opened the door. The wind was still fierce but not impossible. The snow was still falling but not sideways. The temperature was still brutal but not deadly. "It's breaking," he said. "The storm is breaking." By 6 o'clock, the wind had dropped to 40 miles per hour. By 8, it was 30. By 10, the snow had stopped completely. At midnight on December 29th, the stars came out. Everyone went outside slowly, carefully wrapped in every piece of clothing they had. They stood in the snow, looking up at the clear sky, breathing air that didn't try to kill them. "It's over," Mary whispered. "We survived." Jacob looked at the 18 people standing around his hay-covered cabin, this structure that everyone had mocked, that people had called crazy, that had become the only reason any of them were alive. "We survived," he agreed, "but a lot of people didn't." At dawn on December 30th, they began the grim work of discovery. The Johnsons' cabin collapsed, everyone dead. The Dresslers' original cabin destroyed, which they already knew. The Hastings cabin 4 miles away, Jacob and Wilhelm made the journey. They found Mrs. Hastings and the 2 boys huddled together in bed, frozen solid, holding each other. Hastings broke down completely when they told him, "I left them. I abandoned them to die alone." "They died together," Jacob said. "That's more than most people get. And they died knowing you loved them enough to try." Throughout the county, the death toll mounted. 23 people dead. 15 cabins destroyed. Livestock decimated. Stores gone. An entire community brought to its knees by 5 days of storm that nobody had believed could happen. Except Jacob Steiner. On January 2nd, 1889, the survivors gathered at what was left of the town center. Everyone who'd survived wanted to understand how. Jacob stood before them, uncomfortable with attention, but willing to teach. The hay insulation works because compressed grass traps air in millions of tiny pockets. Each pocket is a barrier to heat loss. 18 inches of compressed hay equals 3 feet of wood in insulation value, but weighs half as much and costs nothing but labor. "But why didn't anyone know this?" someone shouted. "Because everyone forgot. Because we thought new ways were automatically better. Because we were too proud to learn from the past." Jacob looked at Thomas Bradley. "Because people like me, immigrants, old-timers, anyone who remembered the old techniques, were dismissed as crazy." Bradley stepped forward. "I was wrong. I said it to Jacob privately, now I'm saying it publicly. I built cabins that killed people. Jacob built a cabin that saved 18 lives. If anyone wants to build with me going forward, I'm using his methods, not mine." The crowd murmured. This was the respected builder admitting total failure. "I want to learn," another voice called. "I want to build like Jacob builds." "Me too. Teach us." Jacob raised his hand. "I'll teach anyone who wants to learn. But understand, this isn't about me being right. This is about survival. This is about using what works instead of what's popular. This is about having the humility to admit when you don't know everything." Over the next month, Jacob became an unlikely teacher. Men who'd mocked him now followed him everywhere, learning compression techniques, insulation principles, thermal mass management. Women learned food preservation, supply management, emergency preparation. Thomas Bradley became Jacob's partner, combining his building skill with Jacob's knowledge. Together, they redesigned how cabins were built in Custer County. By 1891, every new structure in the county used hay insulation. By 1893, the technique had spread to 3 neighboring counties. By 1895, it was standard practice across Nebraska. The winter of 1888 to 1889 became legend. Old-timers spoke of it in hushed tones, the 5-day storm that killed 23 people and changed everything. And at the center of every story was Jacob Steiner's crazy hay-covered cabin. On January 15th, 1889. Martin Dressler came to Jacob's door. He was sober for the first time in years. I owe you my family's lives, Dressler said. And I owe you an apology that words can't really cover. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. My wife, my children, myself. I was a drunk who laughed at you and you saved us anyway. I saved you because you're human beings. That's enough reason. Dressler pulled out a deed. This is my land, 40 acres adjoining yours. I'm giving it to you. I don't want your land. I don't care. You're getting it, because I can't repay what you did, but I can at least try. He pressed the deed into Jacob's hands. Build something on it. Teach people. Make sure what you did matters beyond just us. Jacob looked at the deed, then at this broken man who was trying to rebuild himself. I'll take it on one condition. You help me build a school. A place where we teach the old ways alongside the new. Where we make sure nobody forgets how to survive. Dressler extended his hand. Deal. They built the school that spring. It stood for 40 years, teaching thousands of children the techniques that had saved 18 lives during the worst winter in 50 years. On February 1st, 1889, Sarah Mitchell, the woman who'd walked through the storm after her husband died, came to Jacob with news. I'm leaving Nebraska, going back east. I can't stay here anymore, too many memories. I understand. But I wanted you to know something first. My husband's last words were, find Jacob Steiner's cabin. He'd heard about it in town, heard people mocking it, and he said to me, that man's not crazy. That man's smart. If things go bad, you find him. She started crying. He died telling me to find you, and his last act saved my life. Jacob embraced her. Then his death wasn't wasted, and neither is your survival. Go east, live, make his sacrifice mean something. She left the next day. Jacob never saw her again. But he heard years later she'd remarried, had children, lived a long life. Her husband's last words had saved her, and she'd made that gift count. On March 1st, 1889, George Hastings stood at his family's graves. Jacob and Wilhelm stood with him. I don't know how to live with this, Hastings said. I left them. I survived. They didn't. How do I live with that? You live by making it matter, Jacob said. You live by helping others survive. You live by making sure your wife and boys didn't die for nothing. How? You're a surveyor. You understand engineering structure design. Help me teach others. Help me spread what saved us. Give your family's death meaning by preventing other deaths. Hastings looked at the graves, then at Jacob. All right, I'll try. He became one of Jacob's best students, then one of his best teachers. By 1895, Hastings had personally redesigned 43 buildings across Nebraska, saving countless lives in subsequent winters. On April 15, 1889, spring finally arrived. The snow melted, the ground thawed, life returned. Jacob stood outside his cabin looking at the hay walls that had saved 18 lives. They were weathered now, compressed even tighter by months of snow and wind. But they were still standing. Wilhelm joined him, walking with a slight limp from his missing toes. Papa people are calling it the Steiner method now, the Steiner cabin, the Steiner technique. I don't care what they call it, I care that it works. But doesn't it bother you that everyone mocked you and now they're claiming your ideas as their own? Wilhelm, I didn't build this cabin for glory. I built it to keep you and your mother alive. Everything else is just noise. He put his hand on his son's shoulder. You risked your life in that storm. You saved everyone. Are you looking for credit? No? Then you understand. We do what needs doing. We use what works. We survive. The recognition doesn't matter. The survival does. They stood in silence, watching the sun rise over the prairie that had almost killed them. Papa, what do we do now? Now we prepare for next winter, because this won't be the last storm. And when it comes, I want everyone ready. On July 4th, 1889, the county held a celebration, food music community gathering. Everyone who'd survived the winter was there. Thomas Bradley stood to speak. 6 months ago, I was the respected builder in this county. I'd built 40 homes. I had a reputation. I had pride. And I nearly killed everyone I loved because I was too arrogant to listen to someone who actually knew what he was talking about. He looked at Jacob. Jacob Steiner saved my daughter's life. Saved my whole family. Saved 18 people total. Not because he wanted recognition. Not because he wanted to prove me wrong. But because he knew how to survive, and he was generous enough to share that knowledge despite how we'd treated him. The crowd applauded. Jacob looked uncomfortable. I'm not here to praise Jacob, Bradley continued. I'm here to make a promise. I promise that I'll never again dismiss someone because their methods seem strange. I promise to always ask, does it work, before asking, is it normal? I promise to teach my children that wisdom can come from anywhere, and pride is what kills us when survival is on the line. He raised his glass. To Jacob Steiner, the man who was right when everyone else was wrong. Everyone drank. Jacob stood reluctantly. I'm not comfortable being called a hero. I'm just a farmer who remembered what his grandfather taught him. But I'll accept one thing: I was right and most of you were wrong. Not because I'm smarter, not because I'm better, but because I was willing to look foolish using methods that actually worked. He looked around at all the faces. The lesson isn't, listen to Jacob Steiner. The lesson is, don't dismiss wisdom just because it looks old-fashioned. The old ways aren't old because they're outdated. They're old because they worked long enough to survive. And sometimes surviving is all that matters. In 1912, Jacob Steiner died at age 87, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Wilhelm, now 60 years old, held his father's hand. Papa, you changed everything. You saved so many lives. I saved 18 people in a storm, that's all. You saved thousands. The techniques you taught, the methods you spread, they've saved thousands of people in dozens of storms since then. Jacob smiled weakly. Then maybe being called crazy was worth it. He died peacefully that night. His funeral was attended by over 300 people. They buried him next to Mary, who'd passed 2 years earlier, and near the small graves of Anna and Friedrich. On his headstone they inscribed Jacob Steiner, 1825 to 1912. The man who built the cabin that saved 18 lives. The man who remembered when everyone else forgot. And in a small museum in Custer County, preserved under glass, sits a section of compressed hay, 18 inches thick, still intact, after 40 years, with a plaque that reads, "Sometimes the old ways aren't outdated. Sometimes they're tested by time and proven by survival. And sometimes the fool everyone mocks is the wise man everyone needs." The storm of 1888 taught Nebraska one undeniable truth. Wisdom doesn't care about popularity, preparation doesn't require permission, and survival belongs to those humble enough to learn from anyone, even a crazy old German immigrant who wrapped his cabin in hay.